This is the Daily Brief, one landmark court decision explained in plain English every day. Presented by FindCourtCases.com, this is your daily briefing on the law that shapes American life.
We are doing a deep dive today into, well, it's not just a court case. It was a genuine constitutional crisis that really tested the limits of American democracy.
It really was. We're talking about United States v. Nixon from 1974. And to get it, you can't think of it like a dry legal document. You have to imagine it playing out in real time.
Because the question was so fundamental, right?
It was existential. The question was simply, can the President of the United States operate completely outside the reach of the criminal justice system?
That's the whole ballgame right there. I mean, what was at risk was the rule of law itself. You had a federal court demanding evidence for a criminal trial, and you had the sitting president, Richard Nixon, basically saying no.
Not just no, but you don't even have the authority to ask. He claimed absolute executive privilege, that his private conversations were untouchable.
And the court's decision in this case, it defined what checks and balances actually mean in the real world.
It did. It affirmed that, yes, executive privilege is a real and important power, but, and this is the key, it is not absolute. No one, not even the president, is above the law.
Okay, so let's tell this as a story, not a case brief. For anyone who didn't live through the Watergate era, where does this whole showdown begin?
Well, the conflict doesn't actually start with President Nixon directly. It starts with the people around him.
His inner circle.
Exactly. 7 individuals, all high-ranking officials connected to the White House and his re-election committee, they get indicted.
And we're not talking about minor charges here.
Oh, not at all. These were incredibly serious felonies. Conspiracy to defraud the United States, obstruction of justice. The prosecutors were trying to prove a conspiracy that reached the highest levels of government.
And to do that, they needed proof. They needed the smoking gun.
And that smoking gun was, in the most protected place imaginable. The president's private recorded conversations in the Oval Office. The tapes. The special prosecutor, a man named Leon Jaworski, knew that the key evidence, the recordings, memos, all of it, was right there. So he sought a subpoena.
A subpoena duces tecum, which is a fancy legal term for what?
It's just a formal order saying you must produce these specific things. It wasn't a fishing expedition. He had to name the specific tapes that were relevant to the criminal charges against these 7 men.
But Nixon's response wasn't to argue about which tapes were relevant. His response was a flat-out refusal on principle.
That's it. He asserted what's called a generalized claim of executive privilege over all of the materials.
Wait, so the argument wasn't this specific tape contains national security secrets. It was just, these are my conversations. They happened in my office, so you can't have them, period.
That is the heart of the conflict. He was arguing for essentially absolute immunity for any and all presidential communications.
So what did the lower court do?
The district court disagreed with him. They said, look, there is a presumption of privilege. We respect the office. But the special prosecutor has shown a strong enough need for this specific evidence that it overcomes that general presumption.
So they didn't just order the tapes released to the public?
No, they were very careful. They ordered what's called an in-camera review.
Meaning the judge looked at them in private?
In private, exactly, to see what was actually relevant to the trial. But Nixon immediately appealed, trying to block that order, which is how this case just shot straight up to the Supreme Court.
And before they even got to the main issue, Nixon's legal team tried to argue that the courts had no business being involved at all, didn't they? This idea of jurisdiction.
Right. This is a really important structural argument they made. They said this was just an intra-branch dispute.
So like a fight within the family. This is an argument between me, the president, and my own employee, the prosecutor, so courts stay out of it.
That was the argument precisely. But the Supreme Court just did not buy it. They looked at how the special prosecutor was appointed.
By the Attorney General.
Yes, and he was given specific regulations that guaranteed his independence and his authority to contest claims of privilege. So he wasn't just some employee arguing with the boss. He was acting with the full force of the law behind him.
So it wasn't a political question for the White House to solve internally. It was a real legal dispute.
It was a constitutional question that the judiciary had to decide. It goes all the way back to Marbury v. Madison. The court's job is to say what the law is.
Okay, so they established they have the right to rule on this. Then comes the main event. Executive privilege. What is the one-sentence takeaway from the Supreme Court on this?
If you remember nothing else, remember this. Executive privilege is a real and constitutionally based power, but it is not absolute.
Not absolute. And the court was careful here, weren't they? They didn't just say a president has no right to privacy.
Oh, they were extremely careful. They explicitly acknowledged that confidentiality in presidential communications is vital. Presidents need to get candid, honest advice from their aides without fear that every word will end up on the front page of the newspaper.
It's essential for good decision-making.
Absolutely.
So if confidentiality is so important, why did it lose here? What tipped the balance?
It was the kind of claim Nixon made. He made a generalized claim. He didn't say tape number 34 contains sensitive military plans.
Right.
He just said all conversations in my office are protected just because. And the court said that general interest in secrecy has to give way to the specific demonstrated need for evidence in a criminal trial.
So the needs of the justice system due process for the defendants outweighed the president's general need for privacy.
Yes. The constitutional guarantee of a fair trial is a superior claim. If Nixon had made a more specific claim, saying a tape discussed sensitive diplomatic negotiations or national security secrets, the court admitted the outcome might have been very different.
But he didn't. He just built a wall around everything.
He did. And the court said that general need for privacy, while important, can't be used as a shield to block the basic functions of justice.
And the tool the prosecutor was using here, this Rule 17c, the court was clear that it wasn't just a license to go on a fishing expedition, right?
Absolutely. The prosecutor had to clear some very high hurdles. He had to show the tapes were relevant, that they would likely be admissible as evidence in court, and that he couldn't get the information any other way.
He had to prove he wasn't just rummaging through the president's files hoping to find something bad.
Exactly. He showed that these specific tapes were essential for the conspiracy trial to proceed fairly.
It sounds like a total loss for Nixon, but the court built in a really important safeguard. Let's go back to that in-camera review.
This is, I think, the most elegant part of the decision. It's what makes it a balancing act, not just a beatdown of presidential power. The court knew it had to get the evidence, but it didn't want to just throw open the doors to all presidential secrets forever.
They needed the specific evidence for this one trial, but they had to protect the institution of the presidency for the future.
That's the key. So the district court judge, Judge Sirica, he acts as a gatekeeper. He gets the tapes, he listens to them in his chambers privately, and he separates out only the parts that are relevant and necessary for the criminal trial.
Everything else.
Everything else that's not relevant gets returned under seal back to the president. Confidentiality protected.
That's a really surgical approach. They're saying, we have to invade the privilege, but we will do it as narrowly as humanly possible.
It shows a deep respect for the executive branch, even while ruling against its claims of absolute power. And it's why this case is still debated. I mean, reasonable people can still argue about where that line should be drawn. This was the court's best attempt to manage that tension.
So let's bring it to today. Why are we still talking about a case from 1974? Why does this still matter so much?
Because it set the standard. It created the modern blueprint for how we handle fights between the White House and, well, everyone else, Congress, the courts, investigators.
It's the baseline for accountability.
It is. Every time a president claims executive privilege today, the first question lawyers ask is, does this claim hold up under the Nixon test? Is it a general claim of privacy, or is it a specific claim about national security?
It established that the branches of government are separate, but they're not isolated islands. They have to interact, and sometimes one has to yield to the other.
It's about interdependence, not absolute independence. A president's generalized need for privacy simply cannot defeat a specific demonstrated need for evidence in the pursuit of justice.
In the end, what United States v. Nixon really settled was that in our system, nothing is more fundamental than the fair administration of justice.
Exactly. The Constitution grants immense power to the president, but this case was the moment the Supreme Court made it crystal clear that the Constitution also creates limits. That confidentiality is necessary, but it can't become an impenetrable shield that places anyone above the law.
And that leaves you with a final thought to chew on. The court in Nixon drew a pretty clear line. A general claim of privacy loses to the specific needs of a criminal trial. But what happens when it's not a general claim? What if a future president makes a very specific, very credible claim that releasing evidence, even to a judge in private, would genuinely jeopardize national security?
When one fundamental constitutional need of fair trial crashes directly into another, protecting the nation, Where does the Supreme Court draw the line then?
Who gets the final say when those two principles clash? Something to think about the next time you hear the words executive privilege.
You've been listening to The Daily Brief, one landmark court decision explained in plain English every day. Presented by FindCourtCases.com, this is your daily briefing on the law that shapes American life. Thanks for listening. We'll be back tomorrow with the next case.